Is your team not performing well? Is morale low and turnover high? Are you falling further behind the competition? I'm here to help. I'm Shani Magoski, and this is the Leadershifter Show, where business strategy and culture finally meet. Explore shifts of all kinds required to build cultures of trust, engagement, and execution excellence. I promise I am not your typical boring leadership consultant, and I will help you and your team get your shift together. Leadershifters, welcome to another episode of the Leadershifter Show with yours truly, Shani. Today's guest is Cecelia Dahl, and you are going to love what she has to say. She is a best-selling author, she's a speaker, and she is like the expert on remote leadership. She lives and breathes it, and she's been doing it for decades. So she's not a COVID expert. It's deep expertise, not just consulting about it, but she's a serial entrepreneur who has run all of her businesses remotely at some point. So you're going to want to listen up to some of her advice. So Cecelia, welcome to the show. So
Thank you, Shady. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. I really appreciate you having me.
Of course. So let's rewind a little bit to the earlier part of your career. I sort of double talk track, like people are so interested in successful entrepreneurs. So as I ask you questions, let's look at them through two lenses. One, entrepreneurship, and two, the virtual lens. So tell us about how you started your career and founded your first company.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, my early career, I was working for tour operators. My history of my career has primarily been in the tour operator space. And I spent a lot of time as a product manager. So I was always on the road 60, 70% of the year, bouncing from city to city. And mind you, this is way before we had cell phones. We were using fax machines at some point in time, right? So you were very detached from the office environment. You'd kind of drop in and drop out. And in 2002, I had worked for two tour operators and been on the road. And in 2002, I left my job. This was post 9/11. And I was looking just for a change and for a challenge. And I always felt like I'm going to do something big. So I started a company called Smart Destinations, which was an attraction pass company. We actually got patents on a programmable ticketing system. So I had started it. My business partner and I built it to $100 million and through a lot of challenges, right? From zero, I started it on a sailboat with at the time, the T-Mobile, some kind of T-Mobile phone that flipped. It was like the only cell phone that kind of had like easy texting and a screen. Sidekick, it was called the Sidekick. So I had my Sidekick on my sailboat and we were starting this company, and it grew, like I said, to $100 million with offices all around the country, ultimately, which we had to shut down and go remote. And so this is way back, like you said, I'm not a COVID expert on remote teams. This is something I've been living and breathing my whole life. And we struggled, obviously, with the challenge of going remote, and it was a lot of hard work. But I'll tell you what, when you get that team going, our team they could do anything. There was nothing that came up that they couldn't tackle or wouldn't tackle. And we had a great time, had a nice, successful exit. And I've since gone on to have several other businesses. So that was like the early days of me sort of jumping out of a career job, getting my own paycheck every month, and becoming an entrepreneur and learning what it's like to lead a company through growth and exit and have a team that, building a team from scratch that would perform at that level.
So let's unpack your experience with Smart Destinations a bunch more, because you did this for 13 years?
Yeah.
Okay. So talk about the circumstances that drove you to take it from a bunch of offices all over the country to a mostly virtual business.
Yeah. Well, it was the recession in 2008, straight up. We had a board of directors at that time. We had raised 3 rounds of venture capital, and some of the
we'll go back to that.
Okay. My favorite days, raising venture capital. Some of the board had been saying, why do you need all these satellite offices? And at the time I was thinking, some of our people had been remote and traveling, and I had been remote and traveling, but we had customers in all of these cities. We were an attraction pass company. We had partners with the attractions. We had customers. And I kept thinking to myself, what if a customer has a problem in a city and they need someone to talk to? And, we're in Boston versus San Diego, and there's nobody on the phones. We were just a small startup. They need a place to go. And we need a place for our attraction passes. And we needed a place for the guidebooks that we sold alongside them. And we needed to store these terminals that scanned the attraction passes. And we needed a place for our stuff more than anything. Right. And I couldn't see at that time. I thought we have to have these offices. Come 2008, they said, there is no choice. The money just isn't here.
Right.
Get rid of them.
Cut the fixed overhead now.
Everybody's working from home. And at the time, I was thinking to myself, and by the way, I hear this a lot now when I talk to people who haven't gone remote, our culture won't survive it. We can't do it. I don't know how we're going to do it. It was so terrifying. But when you're forced into that situation, you have to find a way. And it was, at the time, I thought the worst thing that could ever happen to us. It turned out to be the best thing that ever happened for that company. Because coming out of the recession, all the overhead was gone. People were happy. They had balance in their life. I told them at that time, hey, you could be sitting on the beach for all I care. You get your work done. You have to balance autonomy and accountability in a very specific way when you're working with your teams. But once you find that balance and people know they're being paid to deliver a thing and not to be sitting in a seat for 8 hours a day, and you're really focusing on what they're delivering, the performance just starts to come up. And we were more profitable. We had a happier, stronger culture, and we had no overhead office space to deal with. And it really was, I think, the reason we had such success and were able to exit successfully when we did. And it was really a catalyst for growth for us and transformational in many ways.
So what did you do? What steps did you take without having the benefit of someone like you to maybe do some consulting or even like the zillion pieces of advice online? What were the steps you took as you transitioned and your biggest learnings? Because I'm sure that is what you share partially as a consultant. Don't make the mistakes I did. Here's how to do it successfully.
Absolutely. Well, it was a lot of trial and error because I didn't have any training and I didn't have that experience. So we were constantly trying to work on helping people make relationships with each other.
Okay.
And I think that was the biggest learning. When you're out there and you're remote and you're dealing with people and you're emailing and exchanging, if it becomes all business all the time and you don't know these people, trust just starts to erode. And we could see it happening. We could see it happening on our team. There was one time when, we did not have a lot of money and couldn't spend a lot of money on things, but we had seen that the communication was dropping, collaboration was almost nil, and people were just falling apart. And my business partner and I sat down and said, we've got to have some kind of all heads meeting. We have to fund it. And I think we spent $10,000 at the time to fly people together and get them in the same space for a week. And we were really hemming and hawing. We said, we can't afford to do this. We can't afford to do this. At the end of the week, and by the way, that week, we spent the whole week bonding, getting to know people, getting them to know each other. We did cooking classes. We did activities. There was a little bit of chat about the business and planning and things, but it was very open. We did it in the living room of a rented house and just sort of very casually built trust and connection, and people got to know each other. And at the end of the week, it was unbelievable, the transformation that happened. And my business partner and I both got together and said, we couldn't afford not to do this. This was the most important thing we did. And I know there are companies out there that may not have the funding to get a whole team together. And mind you, we didn't, but we did it anyway. But however you can build, one of my big learnings is however you can build these connections with people and get them to know each other as people, that's sort of fundamental to their performance in the workplace, because they're not going to talk to each other or trust each other if they don't know who they are as humans. You can't just be a role that's in a company that someone else is always exchanging with. You have to be a person.
I want to take a TV timeout before you elaborate or we go on to the next question. Mm-hmm. So leadershipers who are listening and watching, this is great advice. I talk a bit about this all the time too, especially in the context of psychological safety. Even if you don't work remotely, it's super important to have these casual interactions, and it doesn't have to involve alcohol. Newsflash, like there's plenty of things you could do. I love the example of cooking classes. I was invited to go bowling with my clients and their team. So there's lots of alcohol-free ways to do this because they have to know each other as people. And if you do work remotely, I agree, you can't afford not to do this. It pays dividends for a long time to get people together. I don't care if you go to Motel 6 in like Kansas. Sorry, Kansas, don't mean to pick on you. Find something low budget. It doesn't matter. The key is to get people together to form those connections. It couldn't be more powerful. So off my soapbox I go. And
that's okay. It's funny that you say that because hotels are expensive. So we would rent a house, a big house with lots of rooms. And we, I guess I had a lot of women working on my team. We usually had a house for women. And then if we had men, we had a house for men. And then we would do our meetings together. And they would share rooms. And in some cases, I remember actually having air mattresses because we didn't have enough beds. And I remember one time, one of our people, Carrie, who was out in California, she woke up and said, I woke up on the floor because my air mattress didn't make it through the night. And you think about that, like that's so unprofessional. But the reality is this was all part of it. And these are the things they were talking about for years. And by the way, we went bowling once and we had shirts for everybody and they had teams. And these are the things they talk about. Do you remember that meeting we had when we did bowling at King's and you had the red shirts and I had the blue shirts and I got, so many strikes? Those go on forever and it creates that bond, and people have to have that bond to get a sense of purpose beyond their paycheck, to be feeling like they're part of a bigger purpose and a bigger thing, because otherwise they're not going to be engaged at the highest level. They're not going to really be as effective or productive as they could be. And it does make a huge difference. It makes a huge difference. So that was learning number one. People have to get to know each other.
Before you go on to the next learning, to the extent you were building the airplane as it was flying for this new business model, having these connections gives you more grace as a leader as you're making mistakes and learning and course correcting that you wouldn't otherwise have if you didn't have those bonds. So serving that up on a platter as you talk about your other learnings.
Yeah. No, well, I think anybody, whether you're building the airplane while it's flying or whether you're running a big corporation, I think if people trust you and know that you're really doing your best. And I think this is the thing that brings the team together. If they know that you have their back all the time, they will come around and be incredible for you. And I think that was the other thing. I spent an enormous amount of energy having the backs of my team and letting them know, like, this is what we're going to do. And don't worry, I've got you, and you have to have that, especially on a remote team. They have to trust you. They can't think that you're going to go into some room when they're, hundreds of miles away and you're not going to have their back. And if they know 100% that you do, they will always be working as hard as they can to push the goals of the group forward. I guess that's another learning, right? Building that not just among the team, but with yourself. You have to be genuine and authentic, and you can't be the boss. You have to be the leader.
Absolutely.
Right?
And there's a huge difference. Huge difference. Yes. Yeah. So before I forget to ask this question, because I really do want to move on to like real tangible virtual leadership consulting stuff. But, because of your entrepreneurial background and that you raised 3 rounds of venture capital funding, just a little bit quick synopsis of like how you did that and what the impact was on your business.
Yeah. Well, when I started and I wanted to have my own business, I was based in Boston and I was going to just be this small little attraction pass company, but I needed a technology underneath it. And my business partner at the time had a .com background and could do that technology piece of it and was familiar with raising capital. What we realized was I was having trouble getting funded with just my relationship with attractions piece. And he was going to go and get funded for his platform piece, but he didn't have any customers. So we joined together and formed the business. And that was really how we were able to go. We said, we have the business model on top of the platform, and this could be something big. And it was early stage in the attraction space because people were most used to buying attractions once they got to a destination. So pre-selling attractions wasn't really a thing. And what ended up happening was, this is actually a funny story. I haven't thought of in a long time. I
love funny stories. Let's hear it.
I remember trying to think, how are we going to sell this? And I'm sitting on my sailboat, and all of a sudden a commercial comes up on TV, and it's Expedia saying, buy surfing in Hawaii. And I'm like, Expedia sells attractions now? And I just started hammering the phone, trying to get to someone at Expedia. Someone picked up the phone, and they said, sure, we'll sell your thing. And we got a deal. And once we started to get that deal, that's when the investors were getting going. And the impact it had on our business, I mean, I think like any startup, who want to scale need funding, and investors need startups. And it was a great partnership for a really long time. And then you get to that point where they're like, we got to exit. And you kind of get, where you just want to do the best for your customers and do everything and spend money making people happy. And they just want to make it, get it sold. And that was another lesson for me. The relationship that founders have with investors is wonderful for a time until the investors want to get out. And then it's not so wonderful. But they did get out. And it was a story for another time, Shani, but we exited and had a nice exit. It was a company was sold, and it was great. And again, another very interesting learning experience as a leader and an entrepreneur.
I'm sure.
Maybe for another episode.
I congratulate you for getting 3 rounds of funding for a number of reasons. 1, not every startup does. And 2, you're a woman. I mean, it's well documented that still in 2023, women have a much harder time getting private equity funding than men, just hands down. But all those years ago, I'm sure it was even harder. And that's also a topic for another podcast.
100%
to say, but yeah, I just want to offer my congratulations, because that was
thank you 100%. And I was part of a founding team, and I was the only woman, and I'm not sure it would have happened. I did absolutely see and experience, like one time we were doing a pitch, and I was asked to go get everybody coffee by one of the investors.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. I don't know, whatever, but we did it. I let it kind of roll. I think things, probably today it's a little different, but it's also not as different as it should be.
Absolutely.
There's that.
All right. So let's move on. So your consultancy is called Key 360.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. And as we've both said, you live and breathe this topic around effective remote virtual leadership. And you have a key phrase called productivity anywhere mindset.
Yeah.
So talk to us about that.
Well, what I'm referring to in the productivity anywhere mindset is really that when you're a leader, and especially when you're leading a remote team, productivity should be at the front of your mind, right? So whatever you can do to support and encourage productivity, it shouldn't be how many hours are they showing up in their office, right? And sitting at their chair. And I know I'm paying you for 8 hours a day, so are you sitting there 8 hours a day? Because the reality is a lot of people will come into an office and sit for 8 hours a day, but not be so productive for many of those hours. So the mindset shift is really understanding that productivity is productivity, and it can happen anywhere. It doesn't have to be happening. When I was working for tour operators, there was this culture in the organization at one of the companies that I worked for where when you weren't on the road, if you weren't in the office from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., you were less likely to get promoted. If you left at 5, you were a 9 to 5er. If you came in at 9, you were late. And if you wanted to be promoted or thought of in a way that you want to grow this company, don't you want to be successful here? You had to come in and spend like 12 hours a day. And I would literally sit there some days thinking, there's so much more I could be doing at my house, with my dog somewhere, right? It wasn't good for myself. And one of the reasons that I actually left, and I didn't want to be there. And as a leader of remote teams, I think you have to instill upon people that wherever you are, like my example when I was telling people, I don't care if you're sitting on the beach, if you have Wi-Fi, you can be doing your job there. Deliver your job, deliver the product that I'm paying you, the work product that I'm paying you to deliver from wherever you are. And as a leader, you have to get your head around what exactly is that. And that's tough, because I ask sometimes people, when you're when you're giving someone a job, do you give them a job that says, come in from, be in the office these amount of hours and get this bulk of work done over the year? Or are you actually just saying, this is the result I need?
Yeah.
Do it, right?
So the results-oriented work environment, ROWE. I forget what company coined that term, but it's 100% true. And to make a little bit of a corny joke, FaceTime should only be important when it's on your iPhone. Right? The software.
The FaceTime thing, and I don't know if that culture still exists in some companies, but I imagine
Hell yeah, it does. Oh my gosh. And it boggles my mind, like that even during COVID, everyone was so shocked by, we have to work remotely. How are we going to do that? It's like global companies have been collaborating remotely for decades and figuring it out. So why this was such a mystery to people, I never understood. And even like people like you who are on the road 70+% of the time, guess what? You're working remotely.
Yeah. Well, let me say this about that. Here's the thing. Remote work, as you just said, it is not new, right? What is new, however, are the scope of roles that are now compatible with remote work. And that's the adjustment. So anybody who had ever been working remotely before COVID or after, they're all like, oh, yeah, we've figured it out. We know how to do it, and we know how to do it at different levels. But having anybody in a remote role or moving a team or a workforce or a company to a remote work environment, that's a strategic decision that requires a degree of planning and support and infrastructure and tools and training for the leaders. And what happened with COVID was so sudden that these companies and these managers who had never dealt with this, or people in roles who had never been remote, they were it's like shell shock. Oh my gosh, now we're remote. They didn't have the opportunity to have those meetings and say, strategically, this is the move we're going to make. We're going to take it remotely. And that kind of culture shock rattled everybody. And now they're scrambling to catch up and come back to a place where they either say, you have to come back because we're not dealing with this change, or let's put the right tools in place. Let's get leaders trained. Let's plan for this and support it properly. Because it used to actually be, Shani, where people would say, and I had this conversation with a client not long ago, where he would say, I let some people work from home as a reward. Okay? Here's the thing. It becomes almost like a punishment if you don't have the right tools in place, because you don't have the communication infrastructure isn't there. They might not have all the systems that they need in place. People aren't really kind of cohesive. And you have the thing about leading a remote team is everything you do takes more time. It takes more intention, more planning, more support.
Yes.
And you get rewards on one side because you get to save on a lot of the infrastructure costs, and you have access to this global pool of talent, and it really opens up so many opportunities. But it's a lot more responsibility on the leaders of remote teams to make that work well. And I think that's why everybody is struggling with it, because it happened like this.
Yeah. So that's a good segue into, I'm sure you've got a ton of tips. You've published things like 10 tips for virtual leaders. You've got 2 books, Unlocking the Secrets of Remote Leadership and Great Lead Hership Awakening. I love the title of that book. So let me ask you this question. What are some of the less obvious recommendations that you give your clients?
Mm-hmm. So interesting. Yeah. So the less obvious, I guess, here's the interesting part of that question is, for me, everything is obvious.
Less obvious to them. I totally.
I know. I guess there's a couple of things that people aren't doing that are really kind of important things. The first I already touched on is you have to schedule time for people to get to know each other on the team. You actually have to make that happen. And sometimes it's better to let it happen when you're not there, right?
Yeah.
I talked to one client recently who said, we have a Monday morning Zoom call and everybody gets on and it just seems like people aren't engaging and they're not, I want to spend some time chit-chatting. And I suggested to him, why don't you come in 15 minutes later and have somebody each time, right? Start and get to know each other a little bit so that they don't always feel like the boss is here. If that's the kind of relationship. Just try it. Give people that time, or put your favorite record behind. I have one of my colleagues that I've worked with years ago runs a fully remote company now, and he has all his sports jerseys behind him so that people know he's affiliated with certain teams. And I've worked with clients where I think one of the senior team had concert tickets hanging on the wall. Those things are really important. They're subtle. And encouraging other people to do that as well gives people a sense of identity and understanding and connection, right? So, and spend time, whether you have the money to do it in person or not, spend time getting people to know each other. I would say that's something that people don't do. Another thing is I encourage people to have a communication playbook. I have a lot of people who I come into their situation and everybody has assumptions about how they're supposed to communicate. Some people say I communicate on Slack. Some people are email. Some people respond in a week. Some people in 4 hours. If the team doesn't have a set of expectations together, this is who you need to include on conversations. This is who makes decisions. This is how we will communicate with each other. When we're on Zoom, we're going to have our videos on unless X, and get everybody on board with that plan and make a little playbook for yourself.
Yes.
It's a little extra time and planning. Like I say to everybody, like you just take the time to do it because you'll have an incredible result.
Right.
If someone sends me a spreadsheet on a Google Sheet and I don't expect it coming on a Google Sheet, I don't use Google Sheets. I think they're crazy difficult for me to navigate because I'm used to Excel. And I send it back in Excel and they get upset. Don't send me Excel. Send me you have to agree on these things, right? And that can happen. So definitely communication playbook it's not on my list of top 10. So these are extras for you.
Okay.
These are the things that
this is great.
People aren't doing. Another thing that I would say is when you are a leader of a team remotely, watch for cues on your Zoom calls. Watch for people turning off their video. Watch for people who aren't contributing or sending ideas. Because everybody's got their own communication style. And there are definitely times where there might not be anything going on, but there are definitely times when subtle cues can indicate that there might be a conflict or a problem. And it could be something as easy as some process is broken and you just need to go in and fix it. But be very vigilant and proactive about monitoring what's going on your meetings so that you can keep your eye for anybody who's looking like they're disengaging or pulling away. Because having that connection, the connection is the key. The engagement is the key. When people start to slip into isolation is like this monster that looms over remote teams. You do not want the isolation monster making their way into your remote team. And it's so easy to have that happen. Intervene somehow. Just have a genuine conversation with someone. Is there, I just noticed this, and is there anything I can do to support?
I love that. I wrote that down verbatim. Isolation is a monster. I think you said that hovers over remote teams.
I might have. I don't remember what I said.
Yeah, I know.
It's out here like a dark cloud monster.
Like a dark cloud.
Yeah, it really is. What happens is once people start to slip into isolation, then they on a remote team. And the thing about it, as with everything, it's harder to recover when your team is dispersed. So stay on top of that. Don't let people feel isolated. Ever.
Yes. So important. Okay. Love all that advice. Especially the first piece, like leaders like, oh, I do icebreakers during team meetings, which is great. I'm not minimizing that at all.
Right.
I highly recommend it. There should always be some piece of fun, connection, just something during a team meeting so that it's not all boring business. But I love what you said, to give people the opportunity to do it when you're not in the room, because it gives it a whole different vibe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they need that. When we carried on this in-person meeting thing, and I always used to have a rule that at 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock in the evening, I would go back to my room. We ended up eventually getting hotels. We would do like an all-inclusive resort or something in Cancun, and where people could have together time, but it was at least less expensive. I'm out 7 or 8 o'clock at night. I'm out. They didn't see me till the next day because they need that time to know each other without you there. You don't have to control their connections. You know what I mean? I guess, right. That's the thing. It's like, it can be natural when they talk. And there was probably at some point in time, some degree of complaining and this and that. let it happen, because they're going to support each other through it. And as long as you're still there for them and they know you have their back and they're committed to the project and they know what's going on and they're excited about it and they still feel that purpose, they'll come around. They got to get those little things out there and resolve any of that, unless it gets like really bad, but then you'll see it and then you can intervene. We had times when I think one person was spreading a rumor that we were running out of money and everybody was going to lose their job, right? Because we were a startup. And I had to just kind of step in, pull everybody in. Let's get on the call. This is not true, but if it is true, you have to be honest. Right? This is what's happening. This is what we're doing. Here's what's going on. I will keep you informed. I will keep you informed. And that's another, I have in our book, the remote leadership book that I wrote with Catherine Brand. She had a story about a bank merger when she was working for a bank, and she was working on 2 teams, and one leader didn't communicate anything that was going on and left his whole team in the dark, and they all left within 6 months of the merger. And the other leader was honest, and he said, here's what I know, here's what I'll share, I'm working for all of you, stick with me, and they all stayed. And it's a really powerful story about how that transparency and they know you're being honest, and when they trust you, they'll stick it out, as opposed to the guy that left everybody in the dark. They just went and found other jobs.
I love it. It's like a leader A/B testing situation.
It really was. It was actually the perfect example, right? Yeah. She happens to be kind of co-reporting to the 2. So she would hear a little bit from this side and a little bit from this side. And really powerful story. That's one thing when we wrote our book, Unlocking the Secrets of Remote Leadership, we have real stories in there about real situations that happened and learnings that are practical, because like we were talking earlier where you said, don't make the mistakes that I made. And for sure we did. And that's part of how we're out here saying, we want to help.
Yep. So you also offer support to your clients on a YouTube channel called Dear Cecelia. So dare I say that you're the leader version of Dear Abby. But I'm curious to know why you started that. And if someone actually wants to be a guest on your channel and share a real challenge with you, how would they do that?
Yeah. So Dear Cecelia is new. I started it in July. And the reason I started it is because, I love to talk to people about remote leadership in general. It's my passion. I really think it's the way of the future. I've been enjoying it for so long and I've seen the benefits of it. And I would talk to people who would ask me various questions. This is going on, or this is going on. What do we do? And especially through COVID, because half the year I live on a sailboat and we cruise in the Bahamas. And that's where I was when COVID hit. And a lot of my clients from my business were calling me saying, you do this stuff remotely all the time. How do we do it? How do we work together? And as I started to talk to more and more people, I started to feel like Dear Abby. I thought, well, this is what I'm doing. I should just do this, right? So Dear Cecelia is a YouTube channel, and episode 3 is coming out later this week. And it's really for people who have questions. They're troubled, whether they're a leader of a remote team or maybe they're just on a remote team. They can write me an anonymous or not anonymous note, and I will answer it on Dear Cecelia. So to do that is just to go to my website, which is ceciliadahl.com, and there's a tab for Dear Cecelia, and there's a little form, and just enter your question, and then I'll take it in as one of the questions that I might answer on my next upcoming episode.
I love it. I love it. It's so much more substantive than, I'm not sure where to put the salad fork, Dear Abby.
Right. I know, yeah. I did definitely stole a play out of the Dear Abby playbook. But I mean, that's what people, I think, that's what people need sometimes, right? Just I don't want to go to a whole workshop or conference. I just want to ask a question. I've got this thing happening right now, and that's what I'm here for. There's nothing I haven't seen or experienced. I don't think on remote teams.
Imagine. So, question about your other book, Great Leadership Awakening. So, does that also have anything to do with remote leadership, or is that something totally different?
The Great Leadership Awakening is a collaborative book, and it was written by 20 women. It was such a fun project, and I think it's an international bestseller. And it's really talking about our stories and how we came to be the leaders that we are and what we're doing now in the world. And so it really gives a little bit more of just a a background on different women leaders and the way they're approaching this new paradigm of leadership that's sort of evolving, right? We're seeing a shift in the way that leaders operate. And that's right. It's a leadership. And this is a lead her shift kind of a book. It's really fascinating. Some wonderful stories in there. I think there's a collection of 20 chapters, and each of us wrote a different chapter.
I love it. I am going to share this as a recommendation of what's called a guide for a company called Chief. I don't know if you've heard of Chief.
Yes, I have.
I love it. For those of you listening, watching who haven't heard of Chief, it is a company that was founded exclusively to serve the needs of senior and executive level women. So to even apply, you have to be at least VP level. So there's VP all the way up to C-suiters. And even though all female leaders and leaders in general have common challenges, there's a sort of a separate category of challenges when you're at that level. And one of the things that they offer as a benefit of membership is dividing people up into these cohorts that we call core groups, which are facilitated by people like me, who are executive coaches and also leadership facilitators. So I have 3 groups of core groups right now, and I am going to cut and paste the link from Amazon today to recommend this book.
Wonderful. Yeah, it was an awesome project to be part of. And some of the women in the book have overcome incredible challenges and really are doing amazing things today. So I would say, yeah, that would be a great book for your group at Chief.
Okay. So as we're closing, how can people reach you, both if they want to hire you as a consultant or do one of your workshops? Because I know you've got a bunch of workshops that you offer to come in and do during within companies. And of course, you do keynote speaking. How can people reach you?
Yeah, the best way to reach me is just drop into my website. There's a contact me form. It's ceciliadahl.com.
DAHL, folks.
DAHL, that's right. Like
DOLL. I think in this day and age of the Barbie movie, we need to differentiate that it's not DOLL, it's DAHL.
Correct. Like the author, not the doll. That's right. Not the Barbie, like the author. Ceciliadahl.com. There's a contact me page, and my email's there as well. And I do have a workshop. It's called the Remote Leadership Lab, which is awesome. It's very interactive. We talk about how do we write an engagement plan for our team. We do the communication playbook, and we talk about handling difficult communication on remote teams. It's a half-day workshop that really incorporates a lot of my training, but also a lot of hands-on work that people do to kind of leave there with a plan of action when they get back to their team. So that's the Remote Leadership Lab. And you can just email me about it. Would love to talk to folks about it. Or if you have a conference coming up or need someone just to talk to your leaders at a corporate meeting, if you have leaders of remote teams coming together, I'm available for that also.
To wrap up, I always like to wrap up with a few of the things that really stood out to me. And, I love what you said about the assumption that my culture won't survive the transition to remote leadership. There couldn't be a less accurate statement. But in order for your culture to survive it, you have to be intentional and proactive and follow not just the common sense tips that now everybody knows post-pandemic, but some of the brilliant recommendations that you gave, including, of course, balancing between autonomy and accountability, super important. Recognizing that productivity does not equal sitting at your desk for 8, 10, 12 hours a day, that it's all about results. Scheduling time for people to get to know each other, both with you in the room and without you in the room, and have offsites. Get everybody together into those all hands sessions, and don't just do boring business stuff. Do those bonding experiences, whether it's the bowling, the cooking classes, bingo, I don't care what it is, but just creating those experiences. That's what's memorable, and that's what ties people together. And we didn't talk about this, but I speak extemporaneously. Research shows that people stay at their jobs longer when they have great relationships with their colleagues. Of course, the boss matters, but great relationships with their colleagues is a sticky factor for reducing turnover. And this is not just for remote teams, this is for every team. I mean, I feel like in general, your recommendations are, so it's like good leadership on crack is what you have to be to do remote teams, because it's even that more challenging. So
Yes. Yep.
with that genius analogy that remote leadership is like being on crack now.
It's 100%. It's all the good things that good leaders do with more planning and intention and a little more effort.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so with that summary, I want to thank you again for being on the Leadershifter show. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. Me too. Thanks so much, Shani.
Okay. Leadershifters, mwah. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Go to theleadershipproject.com to sign up for the Scoop newsletter and explore all the resources from this podcast in the show notes. And follow me on Instagram at The Leadership Project and LinkedIn under my name, Shani Magoski, for inspiration and content about all things leadership. Make it a great day.